Welcome to all participants. Welcome back to the last session for today's first day of the conference. I'm Garry Jacobs, president of the Mother Service Society, speaking to you from Pondicherry, India, where it's 12:30 at night. So you'll forgive me if I look at I'll be moderating and also doing the first presentation in this session. We have a wonderful group, as Bill said, with three other very informed, involved, active, committed speakers to talk about what a new paradigm might be and how we would go there. What I'd like to do is make some introductory remarks that kind of follow up on what we've heard in the first two very interesting, provocative sessions, and try to raise some of the questions that we're going to have to explore further and answer, hopefully by the end of the third day. These questions are, I think the first one's been really answered. Why do we need a new paradigm? I think we're all pretty clear on a new paradigm is absolutely essential. And it's also clear that though the title of the conference is a new paradigm in politics, I think it's also clear from all of the discussions we've had and all the speakers we've had up until now that what we're talking about is a multidimensional paradigm change that covers everything from our political and economic and ecological system to our social and psychological and cultural system as well. So we're talking about it in a very broad context. I'd like to say a few things about the reality of radical change. I think we're all convinced that a radical change is necessary. How realistic is it for us to be thinking of such a change? What precedents are for it? What requirements will be there for us to bring about radical change? What are some of the characteristics that a major paradigm change would have to address? What some of the requirements for it? And we particularly want to highlight some of the symptoms and signs of what we already see going on that may indicate that we're already moving along these lines. The idea of paradigm change in politics is not new. We've seen over the last 400 or 500 years some significant changes in paradigm politically with the growth, development of the nation state, with the founding of the international organizations after Second World War, with the virtually very sudden collapse of a global colonial empires, which were governing about a third of humanity. And within 15 years, the global community of nations went from 50 or 60 countries to 120, then 160, now 193 or 194. So we've seen that radical paradigm changes do take place. And then most recently, I think we've all lived through what happened from 1989 to 1992, which is perhaps the most sudden and unexpectedly dramatic political paradigm change that followed not just at a national level, but that affected the whole world with the end of the Cold War, the breakup of the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc, the end of the communist rule there, and the radical change in the security situation in the world with the radical reduction in nuclear weapons. So we know there have been radical and paradigm changes in the past. One of the questions we have to deal with is the speed and urgency that's required, because I think the consensus today is we've never had such an urgent need for change as we have now. The COVID pandemic, as Erwin said, has made it evident to us about the urgency of changing the way we operate. Climate change is just hanging over our heads around the corner, and we know this is far more serious. It has not been pressing us physically the way COVID has, so it gives us a little sense of complacency that we don't have with COVID. But the problem, as we all know it, is that by the time we begin to really feel the tremendous impact of climate change, we're already seeing it, but we're already, the time we really, a large percentage of humanity begins to feel it hurting very much, it may be too difficult or too late to make the kind of changes that need to be made. So there is a sense of urgency that we've never had before. But one of the things that that distinguishes the situation today, apart from the urgency, apart from the multidimensional challenges that we're facing, which are not just political and economic and social, ecological, cultural challenges we're facing. But apart from that is that this seems to be a change that has to happen at the whole global level. And that's an issue that I don't think we've really discussed or addressed up until now. If we're going to address issues like the pandemic, we've required an unprecedented level of coordination and cooperation so far, and we understand that's not enough. As long as the pandemic is active anywhere, the whole world is still vulnerable to it, and we've been seeing that. This is much more true when we come to climate change. But it's also true in terms of our international financial system and the destabilizing effect of the existing system and the whole way business has been operating in the world. So there's been a lot of discussion in the first two sessions, a rightful, important discussion on the need for change at the local level, at the grassroots level. But I raised the question for us to discuss and think about, and I think it was Fred who made a perceptive comment in the last session that is grassroots change going to be enough? Because we've got problems that can only be addressed when we work in coordination at the global level. The Mother Service Society is a center of excellence of the World Academy of Art and Science, which I happen to be president of right now. And we're collaborating on a project we've just been near completing with the United Nations in Geneva called Global Leadership in the 21st Century. And the most important observation or consensus observation we've had about that in the project is that we don't have the global leadership we need. We have a vacuum in global leadership at a time when it's urgently needed, and without it, there's no way that we can handle all the problems that we're facing. So the idea of having local initiative and needing it to be at the grassroots from the local level makes a lot of sense. That's where creativity takes place. That's where new ideas are born. But unless we're able to marry that local initiative, that decentralized initiative, with change that covers the whole world, that links us all together, that enables us to coordinate not just our thinking and our feeling, but our actions as well. Unless we have the organizational mechanisms to do that, it's not at all clear that we're going to get the kind of magnitude and scope and reach of paradigm change and speed of paradigm change that we need. The Mother Service Society was founded based on, to study the work of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, who for 100 years have talked about the social evolution, wrote 100 years ago about the social and political evolution of humanity. And in looking towards the future, raised that one of the dilemmas that we are facing today is that whatever change we're going to do, it's going to have to be supported by psychological change. It cannot be just putting in place new organizations and institutions at the global level. unless we're able to create a shared sense of identity at the global level, we won't be able to get the kind of cooperation we need, coordination we need, understanding we need, universal values we need in order to make this happen. And so this is a question we're going to have to answer. How do we not only inspire ourselves with a new message, a new set of values, but how do we reach out and really build that sense of common identity at the global level that's necessary for a paradigm change of this magnitude? We know mostly these paradigm changes take place over a long time. So one of the questions we're going to have to ask ourselves is, how do we accelerate it dramatically? We know they usually start in one place and they spread. They do spread, but they spread relatively slowly. How are we going to accelerate the spread in the right direction? We know that paradigm changes involve a major shift in the distribution of power in the society, whether it's a shift from monarchy to democracy or from colonial rule to independent states or from communism to capitalism, whatever it is, there's a radical shift. Where are the centers of power today that are resisting that change? And how is that power, how is that transition and redistribution of power going to take place? These are important issues. We also know that, that paradigm changes are characterized by, for each forward progress, we meet reversals, reactions, retreats back and forth. It's never a smooth process. A French Revolution is a really dramatic example, but there are many others too, where after 10 years of revolutionary going back and forth from the very radical to the conservative, we ended up in an empire, in a new empire, rather than in a democracy. And I think it's important for us to understand that what we're seeing today, we believe, is an expression of the very speed and tension and pressure for paradigm change is also raising the reaction of the vested interest and entrenched powers, and also reactions of those who simply don't understand what's going on and feel the insecurity and the anxiety that's raised by not having a clear vision of a future and the answers to it. The economic insecurity, the human insecurity, which Jonathan Granoff's going to talk to us about in a few minutes. But what will be the requirements? We're going to need a paradigm change that's multidimensional. It's not just focusing on ecology. It's not just focusing on economy. It's not just focusing on politics. We're going to need it with unprecedented urgency. It's going to have to, I believe, it's going to have to reach all the way to the global level. These are things we've never done before. We don't have any precedent for trying to bring about rapid, radical change together at the global level. So it really is a paradigm change. It's going to have to involve a radical transfer of power. In the World Academy, we have been working on a number of active engagements, which Bill alluded to, and I'm just going to mention very briefly. We actually started a project on new paradigm change back 7 years ago with the UN, looking at some of the challenges that are involved. We started a group on the need for new economic theory. Very important point, because a paradigm change, as our discussion today has reflected, always starts with new thinking, with a new conceptualization of how society should be based. And now we're seeing a tremendous amount of new thinking challenging the existing orthodoxy, the neoliberal orthodoxy, which is a sign that paradigm change is preparing, because it has done that. We're going to need a radical change in the educational system. We've started an organization called the World University Consortium. Janani Ramanathan, who you'll hear from in a minute, is a director on the consortium, looking at how do we design a global educational system which meets the needs of all humanity. It's not being worked on today. Universities are working for themselves, countries are working for themselves, but the need is much greater. The changes in capital are important. A couple of years ago, we were involved with the UN on an initiative called the Future Capital Initiative, looking at how do we redirect the power of capital in the world to really address global common good. And I'll come and mention a couple of things that are happening now that reflect that as well. And there are a lot of things going on, and I mentioned these only as indicative. There are many groups that are working on similar things. So what are some of the indications that we are approaching or preparing for a paradigm change? I think Erwin said it very well when he said the difference today is that never before has global society anticipated the need for radical change in advance and been thinking about it, and never before have we discussed it as a global community together, trying to figure out what it should be and what the solutions are. Today, our global civil society consists of 10 million organizations, 41,000 of them international NGOs, very actively working on different dimensions of that. We never had a civil society organized in the world as it is today, even at the national level, let alone at the global level. It's a sector that just didn't exist in any widespread way until about 30, 40 years ago. We have a greater awareness today of the need for change and a greater consensus on the need for change, not necessarily a consensus on what that change should be, which is what makes this discussion so important. We see signs, and this is an important point. We see signs already that the existing power structures are under heavy pressure to change. We see challenges to the neoliberal economic model. We see challenges to the financial system. The central banks are spending money in ways they never have before, not just to uphold the financial system, but distributing it much more widely for SDGs and common interest. We see pressure from investors for shifting funds more to the SDGs and environmentally sound areas. We see pressure on businesses to recognize their responsibility for the common good and not just to serve shareholders. Even World Economic Forum has announced they've renounced the shareholder value for a stakeholder value approach, things that we never saw before. Just in the last month, we've seen how many nations joining together on a movement for global minimum income tax, for corporate income tax all over the world. This is unprecedented. We've never seen it before. We've seen unprecedented pressure on the oil companies, the petroleum companies. Netherlands, just the court recently ordered Shell to reduce their carbon emissions by 45% by the end of the next decade. BlackRock announced it's been pressurizing Exxon and other of their companies to withdraw, to improve their environmental record substantially if they expect for future investments. So these are some of the things that are going on just in the last 1 year or so, which are all unprecedented if we look back just a couple of years. So it suggests something is on the move. And what we hope to do in the next 2 days is try to get a greater clarity of what is the change that we need, that we can build consensus on, and what are the steps necessary to bring about a change of unprecedented magnitude.